think, I mean, I wouldn't say that I necessarily wanted to do more, but that's where the work was. You know, if you, if you wanted to work after 9/11, pretty much the only interest was in, at least for what I do, the only interest was in war coverage. You know, people were not going to pay me to, you know, be in New York, but there was a need for it. You know, it was also, especially with Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, they're American wars, so they're wars that I felt like needed to be covered. So, you know, it's always, you know, it's like, you know, Iraq was the Vietnam of my generation, so, yeah. I mean, as an American, you kind of have to be there. Wars you don't agree with, maybe it's even more important that you go, you know. It's not, for me, it's not pro-American or anti-American. It's just, you know, this is a war. There's 29 million Iraqis caught in the middle of it. You know, this is the historical moment that's going to shape the Middle East. It's shaping America. I mean, I personally think the Iraq War, you know, really helped to damage this country so terribly. You know, I mean, I would say America's, personally, I think America's sort of moving into a phase where we're so severely damaged and dysfunctional that we're barely, I mean, we've lost our status as a world leader, we've lost our respect, we're, you know, trillions of dollars in debt, our political system doesn't work, you know. It's not all because of the Iraq War, but it all coincided with the Iraq War, and that was certainly a big factor in much of it. Maybe I'm being naive, you know, but I think America, at its best, was, you know, a sort of a moral power in the world. And I think after the Iraq War, I think we've lost that moral power. We are between $2 and $3 trillion more in debt as a result of the war. We've lost, you know, 5,000 soldiers, hundreds of thousands of wounded Americans, 500,000 dead Iraqis, you know, a civil war that's still going on. I mean, it could not, it's a disaster of unimaginable proportions. I think obviously that the first priority would be the effect on civilians, but pretty much everything. I mean, you know, it's all history. I mean, you're setting down history. You know, it's the military movements, it's the, it's the economic consequences, it's the political aspect. You know, you're photographing people and political meetings and military movements. Military movements that are happening, you're just shooting as it happens, and then later on it becomes some key political, sort of historical event that you didn't realize at the time. John Moore was photographing prisoners at Abu Ghraib, I mean, that is so historically important today, it has such resonance. So he was doing it then because it was the story and he thought it was important and he wanted to get pictures in the paper the next day. But when you look back 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now and people want to know what happened at Abu Ghraib, they're going to look at his photos. Abu Ghraib is a good example of how, journalists are sort of being marginalized because, what is the role of the journalist when the perpetrators are photographing these events and providing evidence? If you look at Iraq today with ISIS, the extremist Sunnis moving into, Fallujah, Mosul, etc. I mean, they're executing people in huge groups, they're cutting people's heads off, and they're photographing it and they're putting it on the internet. It was the same with Abu Ghraib. I mean, the most important pictures that were taken in the Iraq War were taken by U.S. soldiers at Abu Ghraib. So, and I don't think there's any question about that. Well, I mean, there's no text or photos if you're not there. You know, I mean, I don't believe in, you know, I don't believe in bloggers, and I believe in, you know, bloggers have a place, citizen journalists have a place, but I think this idea that they're a good replacement for a professional journalist is absurd. I think it's stupid. I think it's criminal. I think, with very few exceptions, I think the journalists I've worked with had extremely high standards. I think they're spent their lives dedicated to sort of telling the facts straight. Everybody has a point of view, but I think that the journalists I work with, you know, literally put their lives on the line year after year to tell the story correctly. I think they had the highest standards. I think, you know, they would never, you know, misstate something or make something up, or, I mean, they just, I'm not saying it never happened, but I'm saying 99%, I felt like there were extremely high standards. There have been news agencies now that, you know, there are big news agencies, which wire services that I won't name, that have been getting, you know, really extraordinary images out of, I wouldn't say extraordinary images, but they've been getting images out of northern Iraq and out of ISIS, and there are people that are members of ISIS and are very closely allied with ISIS, and they're sending these, they have total access, they can do whatever they want, and they're basically propaganda photos for ISIS, you know, so, and you know, it's complicated because it's a situation where ISIS is never going to allow me or a Western journalist in there in the first place. So if you're looking at somebody like Alyssa Rubin from the New York Times, who's worked in Iraq for more than 10 years, she's scrupulously honest, she knows everybody, she understands the context, she understands the history, she's widely read the history of the country going back 1,000 or 2,000 years. You know, she's worked all over the world. I mean, she's, you know, that's the highest level of journalism. I mean, that is, you're talking about a master who can give context, who, you know, can give voice to the people, who she's a master. And you have to be there. You know, she has spent 10 years in Iraq. I mean, to equate that with somebody with a cell phone or a blogger, it's not the same thing. Right, they're calling attention to what happened, which is useful, you know. I mean, it is some sort of evidence, but I think we have to understand where the evidence is coming from. And I think more and more, you know, citizen journalists who are frequently participants, who are frequently perpetrators in the action, I think their work is being widely used and widely presented as if it's the same as journalism, and it's not the same as journalism. I mean, when I started, you know, not that many years ago, you know, a lot of big newspaper stories were 1,200 words, sometimes 1,500 words. Now they're 900 words, 800 words. If you look at, a lot of newspapers are doing 300 words, 400 word stories. Also with the internet, you know, it's just like click. It's like, what can you do quickly? You know, bam, bam, bam. And I think the attention, you know, the depth is just shrinking down and shrinking down. Of course, we have, you know, less and less attention span. And I think books are a way to open it back up. And that's it. You know, you do the book for history, it doesn't sell, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to remember the, you know, the headline on Yahoo that said, you know, 2 lines that, you know, rebels took whatever, X amount of square miles. You know, nobody's going to pay it. Rebels killed 50 people in Iraq yesterday. Nobody's going to remember that. Nobody cares. You know, but if you can set it down in a book, people will look at that book, you know, for decades. It's just a different way. But
do you think there is anything in the book that should be in the news and it's not?
I mean, in the book I did, yeah. I think the photos in particular, I think, you know, we put a lot of disturbing photos in, a lot of bloody photos, a lot of photos that represented the real, it was a savage, brutal war. And it was fought in the midst of civilian populations, you know. I mean, it was really fought on the backs of civilians, and I don't think a lot of that came through. I know that a lot of newspapers didn't want to publish bloody photos and controversial photos, and so we put a lot of that stuff in the book because it's evidence. Yeah, did I stop covering war? Yeah, I stopped about 2 years ago. Yeah, I was in Iraq in 2012, early 2012, I left Iraq. I don't think I've been in Afghanistan since then. I think that was the last time. So you asked about why I stopped covering it?
Yeah.
I think, you know, I stopped covering, you know, war for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of it was just that when I started, you could get a photo on the front page and there would be a reaction, and the UN would take action, and you know, people would be mobilized and horrified. And today I don't think anybody's paying attention. I mean, I could get a picture on the front page of the New York Times next week. I don't think it would, I don't know, maybe I'm being cynical, but I think with all the social media out there, I think with people just literally getting thousands and thousands of pieces of information every day, I don't think, you know, one photo has the ability to really change things the way that it did 10, 15, 20 years ago. You know, some of it, I think you move on, you enter different stages of your life. I'm 50 years old. You know, I've been photographing conflict off and on for 25 years. What am I gonna, you know, am I gonna go photograph another car bombing, another screaming mother? I guess I could, but I'm not sure why. I also just think there's been a, you know, literally like an implosion. The media has literally sort of destructed in front of our eyes in the last 10 years. You know, the media industry as a business is gone. I mean, newspapers and magazines, you know, I mean, the 3 greatest magazines in America, you know, were, well, let's say most influential. We're certainly, U.S. News is gone. It doesn't exist. Newsweek was sold for $1 not long ago, and Time magazine was basically saddled with $200 million in debt and spun off. I expect it will be bankrupt or extinct within a year, you know. So, I mean, you know, the age of American journalism, and the amazing thing, you know, if you look at the Los Angeles Times, I think they've laid off 65% of their workforce. They've closed all their foreign bureaus, almost all their foreign bureaus. They've closed all their investigative units. Nobody cares. You don't see the public like up in arms, like, this is the foundation of our democracy. We need these things. Nobody cares. People are like, let me go on Facebook and, you know, see if my friend went to the mall and went shopping. You know, it's just like, you know, it's like the foundation of our country here. So
I would ask you that if it's the public doesn't care, or it's about war coverage, or it's about news in general, like they are more interested in Facebook, in daily, in your own lives and trends, or? It's
complicated. It's just complicated. I mean, how many years can you read about a car bombing in Baghdad? Like, there's another car bombing in Baghdad, and there were like another 20 people killed. What can you do about it? What could you do in 2003? It's now 2014, and there's another car bombing, and there's another 20 or 30 people killed, and it's 11 years later, you know, and it's still going on. How do you affect that? I mean, the U.S. spent trillions of dollars, lost thousands of troops, and, you know, we basically created this mess. What do we do? I mean, I think people feel power. What can we do in Syria? I mean, do you really think that the U.S. has like a real role to play in Syria? I don't. You know, on the one side you have an absolutely murderous dictator, and on the other side you have Al-Qaeda fighting against him. I mean, they're both brutal, you know, completely anti-democratic, murderous, you know, sort of entities. And, you know, it's halfway around the world. I mean, the U.S. is really going to go and get involved in that? I agree journalists should cover it, but I don't think the American public feels that they have a decision to make here. And so I think they're tired of it. They don't want to hear about another X number of people killed in the Middle East. You know, if you look at Syria and Palestine right now, if you look at, you know, I'm sorry, if you look at Israel and Palestine right now, if you look at Syria, if you look at Iraq, I mean, it's year after year after year. People don't feel connected to it, and they don't feel that there's anything they can do about it, you know.
Yeah, maybe it's those times were because of 9/11. Actually, after the American public felt that they had something to do with that. They were affected by that, and that wars were consequences of those facts.
Yeah, I don't think the American public has any idea what to do. And then, you know, we're going through our own troubles. You know, we've been in a severe recession for 6 years, and you know, all the attendant political. I mean, we have a political system in America that for 200 years was a model all over the world, and it's ceased to function. I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't. There could be, I don't know. I mean, there could be some racism against the Middle East. I don't really think so. I mean, I think people do care. You show them pictures of dead children, and I think people care. I don't think people want to see that. I just think that people feel powerless. And I think that there's an isolationist attitude that's taken hold in the U.S. now. I think people are no longer interested. Afghanistan is a disaster. It really is. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. You know, it's much more dangerous now than it was 7, 8 years ago. The Taliban are everywhere. They held an election which has been a disaster, predictably. Iraq is a disaster, you know. We've unleashed a civil war. I mean, it's just people, you know, it's expensive. It costs money. It costs troops. And then it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it's actually counterproductive. And so people are isolationist, you know. People look at the mood, you know, look at the attitude towards immigration, you know. It's like we want to build walls, you know, we want to block it. In Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, on the one hand, you know, I complain about the embedding process all the time, but because there are a lot of restrictions. But, you know, Patrick Chauvel, who's a great French photojournalist, you know, he said the whole debate about embedding, it's kind of bullshit because you're always embedded with somebody. He said, you know, in 1985, I went to Afghanistan with the Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. You're embedded with them. You're living with them. You're sleeping with them. You can't just walk into Afghanistan on your own, you know. Patrick tells the story of photographing I think a Maronite priest in Lebanon during the war. And the guy, his village had just been wiped out, and the priest just became enraged, and he grabbed a machine gun and he was firing this machine gun. And he came the next day to Patrick, and he said, you know, if you publish that photo, they're gonna massacre Christians, you know, across this region. And Patrick said, you know what, you're right. I won't publish the photo, you know. And that was a decision that he made. It was an embed of sorts. You know, you have an obligation to people. You have a relationship with people. I mean, we could spend hours talking about embedding. Yeah. I mean, I'm not for it, you know, but at the same time, it gave us access to the war. You see the good and the bad. I mean, there were a lot of restrictions, and I complained about the restrictions all the time, but in 2003 in Iraq, we had a lot of freedom. We could do whatever we wanted. You could find a patrol on the street, jump on the patrol, and just go and cover whatever they were doing. And then they introduced forms. You had to sign forms, and then you had to, the pages got longer and longer and longer, you know, more pages, and they didn't want you to photograph dead American soldiers. They didn't want you to photograph wounded soldiers without their permission. They decided you couldn't photograph prisoners, then you couldn't photograph hospitals. So, I mean, as the war went on, it just became much more difficult to photograph. I mean, I'm very familiar with Vietnam because I grew up, you know, during the end of the Vietnam War, and for 20 years, I've been looking at Vietnam photos. And I mean, there were some difficult photos, but most of them were in black and white, and I never, ever saw a person's head cut off. Never. Today you can go on the internet, in 10 minutes you can find 20 photos of people having their heads cut off, you know, in color, you know, with the blood. I mean, you can see the head on the ground, you can see them cutting off the head, you can see anything you want. It's all there, and there's lots of it. And that has changed our sensitivity. I think we're totally desensitized. I think, look, you know, it's not complicated. I just think that the foundation of our democracy, of our civilization, really is professional journalists who are trained, dedicated, serious witnesses, and they can go out and they know how to tell a story in a somewhat objective way, and get the facts straight, and get the pictures, you know, correctly, and not set up pictures, you know. And it seems like a basic thing, but it's not. It's not easy to do, and I think it's the most important thing in the world, and I think it's being lost. I think, you know, when I gave up covering war, I mean, partly, yeah, I needed something to put my energy into. And also, my best friend, Tim Hetherington, was killed in 2011, and so I was dealing with a lot of grief, and, you know, I needed an outlet for it, and so the outlet was the Bronx Documentary Center. So I founded this, and, you know, it's given me something to sort of pour my energy into. The Bronx is, you know, the poorest urban district in the United States, and there's just a lot of challenges. There's a lack of information here. Schools are not great. There's a lot of violence. You know, we've had a lot of people killed right around here. So, you know, there's just a lot of challenges, and we're doing photography and film and using those as community organizing tools, and you know, just tools to sort of push for social justice. And we're training a lot of young people. We've got a lot of after-school programs, and we're working with the youth in the neighborhood.
I saw one man from the community last time that gave you a juice, bottle of juice, and I asked him, "Oh, you're taking care of him?" And he told me, "Yeah, I'm taking care of him because he takes care of the community." Do you feel that way here since you're here?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I hope we're helping. We're certainly helping, I think, the youth in the community, the young people. And yeah, I hope we're doing something positive, but other people have to decide that. I can't really say, you know, but I think a lot of the community helps to take care of us. No, I think it has to start with daily journalism. You know, I mean, you can write books about it, but the books rely on the daily journalism. I mean, you need somebody there that day, you know. I mean, memories fade pretty quickly, you know. If you, even a week, try to think back a week and try to think exactly where you were and try to think what time it was and try to think exactly who was present and how their names were spelled and get all the details. I mean, things fade very quickly. It's like, I think you need daily journalism and daily photos on the scene. You know, it's the first draft of history. I mean, we really need it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Mike, I don't know if you remember I told you about my project.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of my postdoctoral project.